Before we begin, here is a question to sit with. Have you ever been tested when no one was watching, when the choice you made was entirely between you and yourself, when there was no audience, no applause, no person who would ever know what you chose, and discovered something about yourself in the making of it? Drop your answer in the comments as you listen. Amara Williams had been out of work for 4 months when she found the envelope. Not dramatically out of work. Not in the specific, crisis-level way of someone whose lights were about to be cut off. More specifically out of work in the way of someone whose previous chapter had ended, whose next chapter had not yet begun, and who was managing the in-between with the quiet, organized efficiency of a woman who had been managing difficult things since she was 19 years old. She had savings. The savings were moving in the wrong direction. $2,000 was not nothing. The envelope was sitting on the ground beside a parking meter on a Tuesday afternoon in March outside a dry cleaner on Peachtree Street. Cream-colored. Sealed. Thick enough to communicate that something significant was inside. She had picked it up. She had looked inside. She had stood on the sidewalk in the March Atlanta afternoon and understood that she was holding $2,000 in cash in a cream envelope beside a parking meter and that no one on this particular stretch of sidewalk was watching her and that she could put it in her bag and walk to her car and no one would ever know. She had stood there for a moment. Then she had looked at the envelope. She had carried it into the dry cleaner. That decision, the one she made in approximately 30 seconds on a Tuesday afternoon with nobody watching, was about to change the trajectory of her next 3 years. She did not know that yet. She just knew what kind of person she was. There is a specific kind of test that life gives you when it wants to know who you actually are. Not the tests that come with an audience. Not the tests where the right choice is obvious because the wrong choice would be witnessed. Those tests are about courage in public and they matter. But they are not the deepest test. The deepest test is the one that happens with nobody watching. When the choice is entirely between you and yourself. When doing the right thing produces nothing except the knowledge that you did it. This is a story about a woman who passed that test on a Tuesday afternoon in March with nobody watching. And about what the universe does, sometimes, with that kind of character. If you have ever done the right thing when no one was watching, this story is yours. Before we begin, one ask. Right character is what you do when no one is watching in the comments if this story finds you today. Now, let us begin. Amara Williams was 31 years old and was, on the Tuesday afternoon in March when she found the envelope, in the specific situation of someone between the last thing and the next thing with considerably more grace than the situation strictly required. She had grown up in Birmingham, Alabama, the second of 3 daughters of a high school principal father and a registered nurse mother who had raised their girls in a household organized around 2 principles that were never stated directly but were present in everything. You do the work correctly the first time. And you do not take what is not yours. Her father had run his school for 22 years with those 2 principles as the invisible architecture of everything he built. Her mother had worked 23 years of night shifts with those 2 principles as the reason she came home in the morning with her conscience intact regardless of how difficult the shift had been. Amara had absorbed them completely. She had a degree in business administration from Alabama A&M and had spent the first 7 years of her professional life in operations management. The specific, organized, unglamorous work of making complex systems function correctly. First at a logistics company in Birmingham and then at a mid-size retail company in Atlanta where she had arrived as a coordinator and had, across 5 years, become the person the company called when something was broken and needed to be made right. She was exceptionally good at operations. Not because she had a natural gift for any single aspect of it. Because she brought to every element of it the same 2 principles her parents had given her. Do the work correctly the first time, and do not take what is not yours, and those 2 principles, applied consistently across 5 years of complex operational problems, had produced the specific, trusted competence of someone who could be given any broken system and left to fix it with complete confidence that when she was done it would be fixed correctly and completely. The retail company had been acquired 8 months ago. The acquisition had produced the specific, familiar disruption of a company absorbing another company's operational infrastructure, new systems, restructured teams, the particular organizational turbulence of two different cultures trying to become one. Amara had been made redundant in November. Not because she had done anything wrong. Because the acquiring company already had an operations team and the mathematics of the acquisition had not required two. She had received a fair severance. She had updated her resume. She had applied for 37 positions across 4 months. She had received 6 interviews and 2 offers that had both been below the range she needed and that she had turned down with the specific, difficult clarity of someone who understood that accepting the wrong offer was not always better than continuing to wait for the right one. She was waiting. The savings were moving in the wrong direction. $2,000 was not nothing. The dry cleaner on Peachtree Street was one Amara had been using for 3 years. She had a blazer to pick up, the good navy one, the one she wore to interviews, the one she had dropped off on Friday and which was now ready according to the text message she had received that morning. She had parked 2 spaces down from the entrance. She had gotten out of her car. She had seen the envelope. It was not a dramatic discovery. It was not sitting in the center of the sidewalk an obvious invitation. It was leaning against the base of a parking meter, cream-colored and slightly damp from the morning's rain, the kind of thing most people would walk past without registering because it looked like it might be a receipt or a piece of mail that had blown from somewhere. Amara had not walked past it. She had bent down and picked it up. She had looked at it. The envelope was sealed. Cream. No address, no label, nothing on the outside to identify it. She had opened it. $2,100 bills. Neatly folded. $2,000 in cash in a cream envelope beside a parking meter on Peachtree Street. She had stood up. She had looked around the sidewalk in both directions. Nobody was looking for an envelope. Nobody was looking at her. She had looked at the money in her hand. She had looked at the dry cleaner entrance. She had walked inside. The woman at the dry cleaner counter was named Rosa. Amara had been coming here for 3 years and knew Rosa in the specific, warm way of someone who has exchanged genuine pleasantries across a counter for long enough to constitute something. She had said, "Rosa, I found this outside next to the parking meter. Can you hold it in case someone comes back for it?" Rosa had looked at the envelope. Rosa had looked at Amara. She had said, "Amara, you know what is in there?" Amara had said, "Yes." Rosa had looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone who was recalibrating their understanding of someone they had thought they already understood. She had said, "Most people would not bring that in." Amara had said, "Most people would not lose it either. Someone is going to come back for this." Rosa had said, "And if no one does?" Amara had said, "Then it sits in your drawer and if no one claims it in 30 days I will figure out what to do with it." She had handed Rosa the envelope. She had picked up her navy blazer. She had driven home. She had not thought about the money for the rest of the day in the way of someone who had closed a decision and moved on from it. She had thought about the interview she had scheduled for Thursday and whether the blazer was pressed correctly and whether the research she had done on the company was thorough enough. The woman had come back the following morning. Amara had not been there. She had left her name and phone number with Rosa when she left the envelope, not because she expected a reward, simply because Rosa had asked and it seemed like the correct thing to include. Rosa had called her at 10 in the morning on Wednesday. She had said, "Amara." The woman came back for the envelope. "She wants to talk to you." Amara had said, "She does not need to. Tell her I am glad she got it back." Rosa had said, "She is very insistent. She left her number. She says she would very much like to speak with you." Amara had looked at the number. She had called. The woman's name was Eleanor Osei. She was 63 years old and had, for the past 28 years, been the founder and CEO of Osei Group. a management consulting and organizational development firm that had started as a one-woman operation in a spare bedroom in Decatur and had grown, across 28 years of the specific, accumulated work of building something excellent, into a firm with 42 consultants, offices in 3 cities and a reputation in its sector that was built entirely on the specific principle that the quality of the work was the only marketing strategy worth having. She had lost the envelope on the way into the dry cleaner. Not dropped it dramatically, it had slipped from her coat pocket as she opened the car door. She had not realized until she was inside and handing over the order and reaching into her pocket for the ticket. She had gone back outside immediately. The envelope had been gone. The $2,000 was the operating cash she withdrew on the first of every month for the specific, small operational expenses of a life that she managed mostly in cash because she had grown up watching her mother manage a household in cash and had never quite changed the habit. It was significant but not ruinous. What was significant, what she had thought about, standing outside the dry cleaner looking at the empty parking meter, was the specific, deflating understanding that someone had found it and kept it. She had accepted this and gone back inside. She had been genuinely surprised, the following morning, when Rosa had called and told her it was behind the counter. She had been genuinely surprised and then something more than surprised. She had called the number. The phone conversation had lasted 20 minutes. Amara had expected 2 minutes. A thank you, an expression of relief, the specific, warm closure of a good deed acknowledged. It had not been 2 minutes. Eleanor had said, "I want to ask you something and I would like you to answer honestly." Amara had said, "Of course." Eleanor had said, "When you opened the envelope and saw what was inside, what did you think?" Amara had been quiet for a moment. Then she had said, "I thought about what it would mean for whoever lost it. I thought about the fact that losing that amount of cash, with no way to trace it or cancel it or recover it through a bank, was the kind of loss that arrived as a specific, helpless kind of loss. I thought about whether whoever lost it needed it." Eleanor had said, "And did that change the calculation? The fact that it might have been someone who needed it?" Amara had said, "Not the calculation exactly. But it informed the feeling. I was not going to keep it regardless. But knowing it was the kind of loss that could not be recovered through any other channel made it feel more urgent to get it back to whoever it belonged to." Eleanor had been quiet for a moment. She had said, "You have been out of work." Amara had said, "Yes." Eleanor had said, "How long?" Amara had said, 4 months. Eleanor had said, "And $2,000 in cash in your hand on a Tuesday afternoon and you brought it to the dry cleaner counter?" Amara had said, "Yes." Eleanor had said, "Why?" Amara had said, "Because it was not mine." 3 words. Simple. Not performed. Not organized for effect. Just the answer. Eleanor had been quiet on the other end of the phone for a long moment. Then she had said, "I would very much like to meet you. Midpoint question for you. Have you ever given an answer to a question that was so simple, so completely without performance, that you could hear the other person receive it in a different way than they expected to receive something?" The meeting had been arranged for the following Monday at the Osei Group offices in Midtown Atlanta. Amara had looked up the company on Sunday evening. She had spent 2 hours. What she had found had produced the specific, quiet recognition of someone who had just discovered that the 63-year-old woman on the phone was considerably more significant than the phone call had communicated. Osei Group. 28 years. 42 consultants. 3 offices. A client list that included 4 Fortune 500 companies and 11 of the most significant nonprofit organizations in the Southeast. A reputation built entirely on the quality of the work and the specific, documented integrity of a firm that had walked away from clients rather than compromise what it believed about how organizational development should be done. She had also found a long interview Eleanor Osei had given 8 years ago to a business publication. The interviewer had asked, "What is the most important thing you look for when you hire?" Eleanor had said, "Character. Not skills." Not experience. Not references. Character. Because skills can be learned and experience can be accumulated and references can be managed. Character is the thing that is or is not there. And you cannot build a firm like this on anything that is not actually there. Amara had read that answer twice. Then she had closed her laptop and ironed her navy blazer again even though it did not need ironing. The Osei Group offices were on the 12th floor of a building on Peachtree Road, clean, well-appointed, the specific professional warmth of a space that had been designed by someone who understood that the environment communicated something about the organization. Eleanor Osei met her in the reception area herself. She was shorter than Amara had imagined. Not from any particular image she had formed but simply because Eleanor Osei's presence on the phone had communicated a physical scale that was larger than the specific, warmly compact reality of a 63-year-old woman in a green blazer with silver hair and the direct, unhurried quality of someone who had been doing exactly what she wanted to do for 28 years and knew it. She had said, "Amara. Thank you for coming." They had gone to her office. The office was not what Amara had expected either. Not because it was not impressive, it was. But the specific character of its impressiveness was different. The walls had framed photographs of teams, not formal corporate photographs but working photographs, people in conference rooms and at whiteboards and in what appeared to be site visits at organizations. The bookshelf had the specific, annotated quality of books that had been genuinely read and returned to. There was a plant that was doing well. There were photographs of people on her desk. Amara had sat across from her. Eleanor had said, "Tell me about your work." Not your resume. Your work. Amara had told her. Not the organized summary of a job interview. The real version. The version she had told the Reed Foundation director and the version she had told the Carter Foundation and the version that came out when someone asked with the specific quality of attention that produced a genuine answer rather than a managed one. She had told her about the logistics company in Birmingham, where she had spent 2 years understanding how a broken system looked from the inside before she understood how to fix it from the outside. She had told her about the retail company in Atlanta, about the specific broken supply chain she had inherited in year 3 and had spent 14 months rebuilding, about the satisfaction of the kind of operational work where the evidence of the fix was visible in numbers that stopped going wrong. She had told her about the acquisition and the redundancy and the 4 months and the 37 applications. She had told her about the 2 offers she had turned down and why. Eleanor had listened with the complete, focused attention of someone who was genuinely receiving what was being said. When Amara finished, Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You turned down the 2 offers because they were below your range." Amara said, "Yes." Eleanor said, "What is your range?" Amara said, "I am looking for something in the range of 80 to 90,000 with room to grow." Eleanor said, "Why 80 to 90? Amara said, "Because that is what the work I do is worth in this market at this level of experience. Not what I need. What the work is worth." Eleanor had looked at her. She had said, "The woman who did not keep the money because it was not hers, who can tell me what her work is worth rather than what she needs." She said it quietly, not to Amara exactly, more as though she was checking something against an existing assessment. Amara said nothing. Eleanor said, "What do you know about organizational development?" Amara said, "I know what it looks like from the operations side. Every time I have been brought in to fix a broken system, the root cause has been a people problem that had become a systems problem. The system was broken because the organization was not structured in a way that allowed the people to do their best work. You cannot fix the system without fixing the structure. And you cannot fix the structure without understanding the people." Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. She said, "That is the most accurate summary of what we do that I have heard from someone who has not been doing it formally." Amara said, "I have been doing it informally for 5 years." Eleanor said, "Yes. I can see that." Eleanor had asked her to come back on Thursday. Not with documents, just herself. She had said, "I would like you to meet some of my team." Not a formal interview. I would like them to meet you and for you to see what we do and for both things to inform what I am thinking. Amara had said, of course. She had driven home from the OSE group offices with the specific, careful feeling of someone who was not yet ready to name what they were feeling because naming it before it arrived would be the wrong thing to do. She had called her mother. Her mother had answered on the second ring. She had said, something happened today. Her mother had said, tell me. She had told her. The envelope. Rosa. Eleanor. The phone call. The 2 hours of research. The meeting and what Eleanor had said about the woman who did not keep the money. Her mother had been quiet for a moment. Then she had said, of course that is what happened. Amara had said, what do you mean? Her mother had said, I mean that this is what happens when you are who we raised you to be. Not always. Not on a schedule. But eventually. The specific person you are was always going to produce something eventually. A Tuesday afternoon in March was when it produced this. Amara had said, yes. Her mother had said, your father built a school on 2 principles. Do the work correctly the first time and do not take what is not yours. You did not take what was not yours on a Tuesday afternoon. On Thursday go and show her how you do the work. The Thursday visit had lasted 3 hours. She had met 6 members of the OSE group team. People at different stages of their careers, different backgrounds, the specific diverse warmth of an organization that had been built by someone who understood that the quality of the team was the quality of the work. She had sat in on a client debrief. Not as a candidate, as a person Eleanor had invited to see how they worked. The specific, transparent confidence of a firm that was comfortable being observed because what they were doing was genuinely good. She had asked 2 questions in the debrief. Both of them had been the kind of questions that arrived from someone who had been in operational rooms long enough to see what the organizational development people did not always see from their side. Both of them had produced the specific, attentive stillness of a room that has just received something unexpected. After the debrief, one of the senior consultants had found her in the corridor and said, those were very good questions. She had said, thank you. He had said, Eleanor does not bring people to client debriefs. In 23 years, I have not seen her bring a candidate to a client debrief. Amara had said, I was not sure I was a candidate. He had said, you are a candidate. Eleanor had called her on Friday morning. She had said, Operations Director. 3 cities. You would oversee the operational infrastructure of the firm, systems, processes, the organizational architecture that allows our consultants to do their best work. It is a new role. I have been building toward creating it for 3 years and I have not found the right person. She had paused. She had said, I found the right person outside a dry cleaner on a Tuesday in March. Or rather, the right person found an envelope and brought it inside, which amounts to the same thing. Amara had been quiet for a moment. She had said, the salary. Eleanor had said, 90,000 base with a full benefits package, a performance review at 6 months with the expectation of adjustment based on what I already know is going to happen, and the specific understanding that the role is yours to build into what it should be. I have ideas. You will have better ones. Amara had said, I would like to think about it until Monday. Eleanor had said, of course. She had said, Amara. I want to say one more thing and I want you to hear it outside of the professional context. Amara had waited. Eleanor had said, I have been building this firm for 28 years on the principle that character is the only thing you cannot fake and cannot teach and cannot recover from the absence of. I have met a great many people across 28 years. I have rarely met someone who demonstrated it as simply and as completely as you did on a Tuesday afternoon with $200 bills in their hand and nobody watching. She had said, whatever you decide, I am glad you found the envelope. Amara had said, I am glad I found it too. She had called her best friend Deja that afternoon. Deja had been there through all 4 months. The 37 applications. The two offers turned down. The specific, quiet management of the in-between. She had said, "I have something to tell you." She had told her everything. When she finished, Deja had been quiet for a moment. Then she had said, $90,000. Amara had said, "Yes." Deja had said, "Because you gave back 2,000. Amara had said, "It was not because of the 2,000. The 2,000 was not a transaction. I was not returning it as an investment." Deja had said, "I know. But that is what happened." Amara had said, "What happened was that Eleanor Osei lost an envelope and I happened to be the person who found it and I happened to be who I am. That is the whole sequence." Deja had said, "And who you are is who your parents raised you to be." Amara had said, "Yes." Deja had said, "So the job did not come from returning the money. It came from the 22 years before the Tuesday that produced the person who would return it." Amara had been quiet for a moment. She had said, "That is exactly right." She had accepted the offer on Monday morning. She had called Eleanor and said, "Yes." Eleanor had said, "I know." Amara had said, "You knew I was going to say yes." Eleanor had said, "I knew the moment you said it was not mine. The rest was just waiting for Monday." Amara had said, "I have a question." Eleanor had said, "Ask." Amara had said, "You built a firm on character. You have been looking for someone for this role for 3 years. How many people did you meet in 3 years who did not have it?" Eleanor had been quiet for a moment. She had said, "Enough to understand how rare it is to find it on a Tuesday afternoon outside a dry cleaner with nobody watching." She had said it with the warm, specific certainty of someone who had spent 28 years looking for the same thing and had finally found it in the simplest possible place. Amara had started on the 1st of April. The role had been built into what it needed to be by September. Eleanor's assessment had been correct. Amara Williams had been out of work for 4 months when she found $2,000 in a cream envelope beside a parking meter on a Tuesday afternoon in March. She could have kept it. No one was watching. No one would ever have known. $2,000 in her hand and the savings moving in the wrong direction and 37 applications and 2 offers she had turned down and the specific quiet wait of 4 months of the in-between. She had carried the envelope into the dry cleaner. Not because she thought it would lead to something. Not because someone was watching. Not because she was performing a version of herself for an audience. Because it was not hers. Because her father had run a school for 22 years on 2 principles and her mother had worked 23 years of night shifts on 2 principles and she had absorbed those principles so completely that the correct choice was not a choice, it was simply the expression of who she was. Eleanor Osei had found the person she had been looking for. She had not found her at a conference or through a recruiter or in a stack of 93 applications. She had found her at a dry cleaner counter. In the specific, simple, audience-free act of a woman who could not keep what was not hers. The job was $90,000. The character was 22 years of watching 2 people do the right thing when nobody was watching. The job came from the character. And the character was never for sale. Final question for you. Have you ever done the right thing when no one was watching, not for a reward, not for recognition, not because someone would find out, simply because it was the right thing, and who taught you to be that person? Leave your answer below. Your voice belongs in this conversation. If this story found something real in you today, share it. 1 share. It costs nothing. It means everything. I love you all. I will see you in the next story.